I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. 5 years is long enough to grow accustomed to invisibility, to learn the particular weight of being present in a room full of people who have decided you do not exist. I knew the pattern by heart now, the rustle of silk as mothers steered their daughters away from where I sat, the careful avoidance of eyes, the way conversations would pause, then resume in lower tones as I passed. I had become a ghost long before I ever met one. It was the winter of 1873, and I was 23 years old, an age when most young women of my station were already wives, already mothers, already settled into the lives that society had mapped out for them since birth. But I sat alone on the gilded chairs that lined the ballroom walls, my gloved hands folded in my lap, my face composed into the serene mask I had perfected over countless evenings, just like this one. The Countess of Ashford's niece, the girl with the ruined reputation, the one nobody quite remembered wronging, but everyone knew had been wronged somehow, and that was enough. My aunt had brought me to London 5 years ago with such hope. I was 18 then, fresh from the countryside, my eyes wide with wonder at the gas lights and the grandeur. She had presented me at court. She had dressed me in the finest gowns her modest fortune could afford. She had introduced me to every eligible gentleman of her acquaintance. And for one glorious season, I had danced. I had laughed. I had felt the intoxicating possibility of a future unfolding before me like a fan. Then came the scandal. Even now, I could not say precisely what had been whispered about me, only that it had spread like fog through the drawing rooms of Mayfair. Something about an indiscretion, a letter, a man whose name I had never even spoken. The details hardly mattered. In society, the accusation was the verdict, and there was no appeal. One day I was dancing with Lord Pemberton. The next, his mother was steering him firmly toward Miss Charlotte Winters, and I was sitting alone. My aunt, to her credit, never asked me if the rumors were true. She knew me well enough to know they were not, but she also knew the world well enough to know that truth was a currency with little value in drawing rooms where reputation was everything. So she continued to bring me to balls and dinners, continued to dress me in gowns that had become slightly out of fashion, continued to hope that time might soften memories and someone might take pity on the forgotten Miss Ashford. I had stopped hoping 3 years ago. The ballroom of Blackthorn House was particularly magnificent that December evening. Crystal chandeliers cast trembling light across marble floors. Hothouse roses filled the air with their dying sweetness. The orchestra played a waltz, and couples swirled past me in a blur of color and motion. I watched them the way one might watch a play, with detached interest, no longer feeling the sharp sting of exclusion that had once brought tears to my eyes in the privacy of my bedroom. I had learned not to cry. Tears left marks on powder, and powder was expensive. Blackthorn House itself had a reputation almost as dark as my own. The Duke of Blackthorn had died 3 years ago, and the circumstances had never been fully explained. He had been found in his study, they said, with no mark upon him, his face frozen in an expression of such terror that the servants who discovered him had fled the room screaming. Some said it was his heart. Others whispered of poison, though no investigation had ever proven it. There had been talk of a curse, of course. There was always talk of curses when it came to the Blackthorn family. The current Lord Blackthorn, the Duke's younger brother, had opened the house for the season in what everyone agreed was a brave attempt to dispel the shadows that clung to the family name. He was a nervous, pleasant man who smiled too much and laughed too loudly at jokes that were not particularly funny. He had nodded to me when I arrived, a kindness that surprised me enough that I had almost forgotten to curtsy in return. The waltz ended, and another began. I studied the pattern of the marble floor, counting the black tiles, then the white. It was a game I played to pass the time. Across the room, I could see my aunt in conversation with Lady Hartley, both of them pointedly not looking in my direction. They were discussing me, I knew. They were always discussing me. My aunt's face had that particular expression of strained optimism she wore when defending my continued presence in society. The air in the ballroom had grown close with the heat of so many bodies. I felt suddenly suffocated by the press of perfume and perspiration, by the weight of being unseen, yet always watched. I rose quietly, smoothing my skirts, and slipped through the French doors that led to the terrace. No one noticed me go. No one ever did. The December air was sharp and clean, a relief after the hothouse atmosphere inside. Fog had begun to creep across the gardens, turning the carefully manicured hedges into indistinct shapes, softening the hard edges of the world. I breathed deeply, letting the cold fill my lungs. Behind me, the music continued, muffled now by distance and the heavy velvet curtains. I walked to the edge of the terrace, my hands gripping the cold stone balustrade. The garden below was dark except for the occasional gas lamp glowing like a small moon through the mist. Somewhere in that darkness was the Duke's study, the room where he had died. I found myself wondering what it must have been like for him in those final moments. Had he known he was dying? Had he been alone? Had anyone mourned him? Or had they only mourned the scandal his death had caused? They said the Duke had been a cruel man. Cold, unsmiling. He had never married, never shown interest in any woman, had spent his days locked in his study attending to business no one quite understood. At his funeral, attended by obligation rather than grief, people had spoken of him in the careful, neutral tones reserved for those who are respected but not loved. I had not attended. I had not been invited. But I had heard the stories. It was strange, I thought, how two people could be so thoroughly erased by society in such different ways. He through death, I through scandal. Both of us ghosts, haunting the edges of other people's lives. I do not know how long I stood there, lost in these melancholy thoughts. Long enough for the cold to seep through my gloves. Long enough for the music inside to change twice. I should have gone back in, I knew. My aunt would be looking for me. But I could not bring myself to return to that bright, cruel room where my absence had likely not even been noticed. That was when I heard the footsteps behind me. They were slow, measured, the sound of boots on stone. I turned, expecting to see Lord Blackthorne or perhaps one of the servants come to inform me that the supper was being laid out. But the terrace was empty. The French doors stood closed, the curtains drawn across them. The footsteps had stopped, but I was alone. I felt the first flutter of unease in my chest. The fog had grown thicker, pressing close around the terrace like something alive. The gas lamps seemed dimmer than they had been moments before. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the wind, my own imagination, overwrought from too many evenings spent alone with my thoughts. Then I felt it. A presence. Not seen, not heard, but felt the way one feels a storm approaching or a gaze upon the back of one's neck. The air had changed, grown colder still, and there was a quality to the silence that felt deliberate, as though something was holding its breath. I should have been frightened. I should have gathered my skirts and fled back to the ballroom, to the safety of gaslight and gossip and being ignored by people who were at least alive. But I had grown so accustomed to isolation, to being the only person in a crowded room, that this new solitude felt almost companionable. If there was something here with me in the darkness, at least it was not pretending I did not exist. I turned back to face the garden, my hands still gripping the cold stone. And I spoke, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I know you are here. The words hung in the fog. I half expected them to dissipate unanswered, to prove that I had finally descended into the madness that society had always suspected lurked in women like me, women who sat alone too long and thought too much. But then, so softly I might have imagined it, I heard a voice. It was a man's voice, low and rough, as though it had not been used in a very long time. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, carried on the cold air like smoke. You can hear me. It was not a question. It was a statement of wonder, perhaps of disbelief. I closed my eyes, my heart beating faster now. I thought of all the warnings I had heard about spiritualism, about the dangers of opening oneself to the world beyond the veil. But what world did I belong to, truly? I was not quite of the living, not fully part of the bright, cruel society that danced inside. Perhaps the dead would be less quick to judge. Yes, I whispered. I can hear you. Silence. Then, closer now, as though whatever presence this was had moved nearer. Look at me. I opened my eyes and turned slowly, half expecting to see nothing, to confirm that I had finally lost the fragile grip on sanity that I had maintained through 5 years of isolation. But I was not mad, or if I was, it was a madness that had shape and form and eyes that watched me with an intensity I had not felt in so very long. He stood at the far end of the terrace, near the shadow of the house, where the gaslight could not quite reach. He was tall, dressed in evening clothes that were just slightly out of fashion, the style from 3 or 4 years past. His face was partially obscured by the darkness and the fog, but I could see the sharp line of his jaw, the pale skin, the dark eyes that fixed on me with something like hunger. I knew him. Not personally, for we had never been introduced, but I knew his face from the portrait that hung in the entrance hall of Blackthorn House, a portrait I had glimpsed when I arrived, the Duke of Blackthorn, the man who had died 3 years ago in his study. Alone and terrified, he was dead. I knew that with absolute certainty, and yet he stood before me, solid enough that I could see the way the fog moved around him, real enough that when he took a step forward, I heard his boot against the stone. I should have screamed. I should have run, but I did neither. I simply stood there, my hands still gripping the balustrade, and stared at the impossible man before me. "You are the Duke," I said. My voice did not shake. He stopped moving. For a long moment, he said nothing, only looked at me with those dark, hungry eyes. Then he inclined his head in a gesture that might have been a bow or an acknowledgement of defeat. "I was," he said, "once." The music from the ballroom swelled, a waltz spinning faster now, reaching its crescendo. And in that moment, with the dead Duke watching me and the fog pressing close around us, I felt more alive than I had in 5 long years. He moved closer, and I could see him more clearly now. The hard planes of his face, the way his mouth was set in a line that suggested he had forgotten how to smile long before he died. There was something wounded about him, something desperate, and I recognized it because I saw it in my own reflection every morning when I pinned up my hair and prepared to face another day of being invisible. "Why can I see you?" I asked. He stopped just beyond arm's reach, as though there were a line he could not or would not cross. His eyes moved over my face, studying me with an intensity that would have been improper in life and was perhaps even more so in death. "I do not know," he said. "You are the first. I have been here since I died, watching them all. My brother, the guests, the servants. I have stood in crowded rooms and walked through walls and screamed until my voice was raw, and no one has ever heard me. No one has ever seen me. Until you." The words were delivered without emotion, a simple statement of fact, but I heard the loneliness beneath them, the terrible, endless loneliness of being present yet unseen. I knew that feeling. I had lived it for 5 years. "Perhaps," I said quietly, "that is why you can reach me. Because I know what it is to be a ghost." He looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that might have been recognition. "Eleanor Ashford," he said, and I startled at the sound of my name in his mouth. "The girl no one speaks to. I have watched you sit alone at 3 balls now. I have seen them turn away from you. I know your face better than I know any of the living." Heat rose to my cheeks, a mixture of shame and something else, something dangerously close to gratitude. To be seen, even by a ghost, even by a man who was supposed to be gone. To be seen was everything. "And you," I said, gathering courage, "why are you still here? Why have you not moved on?" His expression darkened. "That is what I have been trying to discover. I do not know why I remain. I only know that I am bound here, to this house, to the place where I died. I cannot leave. I cannot rest. I am trapped between death and life, and I do not know why." The ballroom doors opened, and light spilled out onto the terrace, along with the sound of laughter. I turned quickly, my heart hammering. A couple had emerged, the gentleman lighting a cigar, while his companion fanned herself with her painted fan. They did not see me standing there in the shadows. They never did. When I turned back, the Duke was still there, watching me with those dark, steady eyes. The couple's laughter faded as they walked to the other end of the terrace, and we were alone again with the fog and the impossible truth between us. "I should go back inside," I said, though I made no move to do so. "Will you come back?" His voice was urgent now, raw with something that might have been fear. "Will you come back and speak with me again?" I thought of the ballroom waiting inside, the golden chairs along the wall, the careful avoidance of eyes, the weight of being present and invisible. And I thought of this man, this ghost, who had looked at me and seen me and spoken my name as though it mattered. "Yes," I said, "I will come back." His hand moved toward me, and for a moment I thought he might try to touch me. But he stopped just short, his fingers hovering in the air between us. I could feel the cold emanating from him, colder even than the December night. "Tomorrow," he said, "come to the study, the one where I died. I will be waiting." Then he stepped back into the shadows, and the fog seemed to swallow him whole. I stood alone on the terrace, my heart racing, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. Behind me, the couple with the cigar laughed again, oblivious to everything. I walked back to the ballroom on unsteady legs. The music was still playing. The dancers were still spinning. My aunt caught my eye from across the room and frowned, a silent rebuke for my disappearance. I returned to my chair along the wall and sat down, smoothing my skirts, composing my face back into its usual serene mask. But everything had changed. For the first time in 5 years, I had something to look forward to. Someone was waiting for me. Someone had asked me to come back, even if that someone was dead. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled when expected. I accepted a glass of punch from a servant. I sat through the supper with my usual quiet dignity, listening to conversations I was not part of, invisible once more. But inside, my mind was racing, turning over everything that had happened, everything he had said. The Duke of Blackthorn, a ghost, trapped in his own house, watching the world move on without him. And I, Eleanor Ashford, the forgotten girl, the scandal, the ghost among the living. We were a pair, he and I, two lost souls circling the edges of existence. When the ball finally ended and my aunt's carriage carried us home through the foggy London streets, I pressed my face to the cold window and watched the lights blur past. My aunt spoke to me about Lady Hartley's daughter, about the need to maintain appearances, about how we must try again next season. I made the appropriate sounds of agreement, but I was not really listening. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the study where a man had died, about the ghost who had asked me to come back, about the way his eyes had looked when he said my name. For the first time in 5 years, I was not alone. And if that meant consorting with the dead, if that meant stepping further away from the world of the living that had already rejected me, then so be it. I had nothing left to lose, nothing except the terrible weight of invisibility. And that, I had decided, was a price I was willing to pay. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed in my aunt's townhouse, staring at the ceiling while the hours crawled past and the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains. My mind would not be still. It turned over every moment on that terrace, every word he had spoken, the way his eyes had fixed on me as though I were the only real thing in a world of shadows. By the time my maid came to help me dress, I had nearly convinced myself it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by too many lonely evenings and too much time spent at the edges of other people's happiness. Perhaps I had fallen ill. Perhaps the fog had contained some miasma that had affected my reason. There were explanations, surely, that did not involve speaking with the dead. But when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the cold that had emanated from him. I could still hear his voice, rough and unused, saying my name, Eleanor Ashford, as though it mattered, as though I mattered. My aunt was in unusually good spirits at breakfast. Lady Hartley had apparently expressed interest in introducing me to her nephew, a gentleman recently returned from India with a modest fortune and no particular prospects. It was the sort of introduction that would have filled me with hope 5 years ago. Now it simply filled me with a weary resignation. "I will call on her this afternoon," my aunt said, spreading marmalade on her toast with determined optimism. "She has invited us for tea. You must wear the blue dress, Eleanor. It brings out your eyes." "Yes, Aunt Margaret," I said. I did not tell her that I had other plans, that I intended to return to Blackthorn House, that I had an appointment with a ghost in a room where a man had died. There were limits, even in our strained relationship, to what could be spoken aloud over breakfast. The morning passed with excruciating slowness. I sat in the drawing room with my embroidery, making small, careful stitches while my aunt wrote letters at her writing desk. The clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds with maddening precision. Outside, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing a gray December sky that promised more cold, more damp, more of the same endless sameness that had defined my life for so long. At 2:30, I rose and smoothed my skirts. My aunt looked up from her correspondence, her brow furrowing. "Where are you going, dear?" "We must leave for Lady Hartley's at 4. "I thought I might take a walk," I said. "The fresh air would do me good." My aunt's frown deepened. "In this weather? You will catch your death." "I have my coat and gloves," I said, keeping my voice light. "I will not be long." She studied me for a moment, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing the impropriety of allowing me to walk alone against the risk of forbidding me and prompting a scene. In the end, propriety lost. I had so few pleasures after all, and what harm could come from a walk? It was not as though anyone would see me. "Very well," she said at last, "but you must be back by 3:30. And Eleanor, do try to look cheerful this afternoon. First impressions matter." "Yes, Aunt Margaret," I said again. I left before she could change her mind. The streets of Mayfair were quiet at this hour, the quality still at their luncheons or resting before the evening's entertainments began. I walked quickly, my head down, my hands tucked into my muff against the cold. A few carriages passed, their wheels hissing on the wet cobblestones, but no one paid me any attention. I was just another young woman, unremarkable and alone. Blackthorn House looked different in the daylight, less grand and more forbidding. The stone facade was dark with soot and age, the windows narrow and unwelcoming. The garden, so mysterious in the fog of the previous evening, revealed itself to be overgrown and neglected, the hedges wild, the paths thick with fallen leaves. It was clear that Lord Blackthorn's attempts to restore the house's reputation had not extended to its grounds. I hesitated at the front steps. What was I doing here? I could not simply walk up to the door and request to be admitted to the study where the previous Duke had died. I would be thought mad. I would be turned away, and word would reach my aunt, and whatever fragile tolerance she still maintained for my presence would shatter. But I had promised. I had said I would come back, and he had asked me to. I walked around the side of the house, keeping close to the walls, praying that no servant would glance out a window and see me skulking in the shadows like a thief. There was a small door, half hidden by ivy, that looked as though it might lead to the servants' quarters or the kitchens. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it opened. The corridor inside was dark and narrow, the walls bare plaster, the floor plain wood. I could hear voices in the distance, the clatter of pots, the normal sounds of a household going about its daily business. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, my heart hammering in my chest. If I was caught, I would have no explanation, no excuse that would sound anything other than deranged. But I was not caught. The house was large and labyrinthine, and the servants were occupied elsewhere. I found a wider corridor, then a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced Blackthorns watching me with painted disapproval. I recognized the layout from the previous evening. The ballroom had been to the left. The study, I remembered hearing, was in the east wing, on the ground floor overlooking the garden. I found it more by instinct than design. A door of dark oak, closed but not locked. I glanced behind me, saw no one, and slipped inside. The room was exactly as I had imagined it would be. Dark wood paneling, shelves lined with leather-bound books, a massive desk positioned before a window that looked out onto the overgrown garden. The curtains were drawn, allowing only thin fingers of gray light to penetrate the gloom. There was a smell of dust and old paper, and something else beneath it, something I could not quite name. The room felt heavy, weighted with significance, as though the air itself remembered what had happened here. I stood just inside the door, my back pressed against the wood, and whispered into the silence. I came, as I promised. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room remained still and empty. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. What had I expected? That he would simply appear because I had called? That the dead kept appointments like gentlemen of society? I had been a fool. I was a fool. I should leave before someone discovered me here, and the scandal that had ruined me 5 years ago was replaced by something even worse. I turned to go, my hand reaching for the door handle. "Do not leave." I froze. His voice came from behind me, from the direction of the desk, I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. He was standing there, near the window, exactly as he had been on the terrace, solid and impossible. The gray light filtered through him in a way that it did not filter through the furniture or the walls, a subtle wrongness that marked him as other. But his eyes were the same, dark and intense, and fixed on me with that same desperate hunger. "You came," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. "I did not think you would." "I promised," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt, and I keep my promises. He moved closer, and I noticed that his footsteps made no sound. He walked like smoke, like shadow, present but not quite part of the physical world. Yet I could see every detail of him. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights even in death. "Why did you come?" he asked. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." I considered the question. Why had I come? Because I was lonely. Because he had asked. Because for one moment on that terrace, I had felt seen in a way I had not felt in 5 long years. Because, I said carefully, you are the only person who has spoken to me as though I exist in longer than I care to remember. Even if you are dead, that is worth something. His expression shifted. Something like pain crossed his face, or perhaps recognition. He turned away, moving to the window, and stood looking out at the garden he could no longer truly see. "I was not a good man," he said quietly. "In life, I mean. I was cold, cruel, some said. I cared for nothing but business and numbers and the maintenance of the family name. I never smiled, never laughed, never allowed myself to feel anything that might be considered weakness. And now I am dead, and I find that I was wrong about everything that mattered." I moved deeper into the room, drawn by the raw honesty in his words. "What do you mean?" He did not turn to look at me. "In life, I believed that emotions were a liability, that love was a trap, that happiness was an illusion for fools. I dedicated myself to duty and dignity and the proper management of estates and investments. And do you know what I discovered the moment I died?" "What?" I asked softly. "That none of it mattered. Not the money, not the title, not the respect of men who feared me but never knew me. In that final moment, when I felt death coming for me, all I could think was how empty it had all been. How I had never allowed myself to truly live." His words hung in the dusty air. I understood them in a way I had not expected to. Had I not done the same? Had I not spent 5 years sitting in careful, dignified silence, maintaining my composure, never allowing myself to rail against the injustice of my situation? I had been so concerned with propriety, with not making my aunt's burden heavier, with proving that the scandal had not broken me, that I had forgotten to actually live. "Is that why you remain?" I asked. "Because you died without having lived?" He turned to face me then, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. "I do not know why I remain, but I know that I am trapped here, bound to this house, to this room. I cannot leave. I have tried. I stand at the door and will myself to walk through it, but I cannot. Some invisible force holds me here, in the place where I drew my last breath." He moved closer to me, close enough now that I could feel the cold radiating from him, a cold that had nothing to do with December. His eyes searched my face as though looking for answers I did not have. "But you, Eleanor Ashford, you can see me. You can hear me. And that means, perhaps, that you can help me." "Help you how?" I asked. He gestured to the room around us. "I died here, alone. I was working at my desk, reviewing accounts, when suddenly I felt a pain in my chest. A terrible, crushing pain. I tried to call for help, but no sound came out. I tried to reach the door, but my legs would not move. And then there was nothing but darkness and terror, and the certainty that I was dying, and there was no one to witness it, no one to care." He paused, and I saw the shadow of that terror cross his face even now. When I woke, or whatever this state is, I was still here, in this room. The servants had found my body. I watched them carry it away. I watched them whisper about the expression of fear frozen on my face. I watched my brother arrange the funeral and divide my possessions and take my place in the world. And through it all, I was screaming, and no one heard. His voice had grown raw with emotion. I felt tears prick at my eyes, though whether for him or for myself I could not say. The authorities said it was my heart, he continued. A natural death, tragic, but not suspicious. But I know it was not my heart. In that moment before the darkness came, I tasted something bitter on my tongue, something wrong, and I remember, just before the pain began, that I had been drinking brandy from the decanter on my desk, the same brandy I drank every evening. Understanding began to dawn. You think you were poisoned. He nodded slowly. I think someone killed me. And I think that until I know who and why, I will remain trapped here, unable to rest, unable to move on. I am bound by my own unfinished business, by the truth that was never discovered. I looked at him, at this ghost of a man who had been so feared in life and was so desperate in death. The logical part of my mind insisted this was madness, that I should leave this room immediately, return to my aunt, drink some tea, and forget any of this had ever happened. But the rest of me, the part that had spent 5 years invisible and voiceless, knew that I would not leave, could not leave. You want me to discover who murdered you, I said. It was not a question. He nodded. I have no proof, he said. Only the memory of that bitter taste and the certainty that someone wanted me dead. I have watched this house for 3 years, watched my brother and the servants and the visitors who come and go. I have seen things, heard conversations, but I cannot speak to anyone. I cannot point to evidence. I cannot force the living to listen, except for you. He stepped closer still, and now we were near enough that if he had been alive, it would have been improper. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his mouth was set in that hard line that spoke of years of holding back emotion. But beneath it, I saw vulnerability, need, hope. I know I have no right to ask this of you, he said quietly. I know you have your own troubles, your own ghosts to contend with, but you are the only one who can help me, the only one who can give me peace. And in return, I promise you this. I will give you the one thing you have been denied. I will see you. I will listen to you. I will make you feel as though you exist. It was a strange bargain. A ghost offering visibility in exchange for justice. A dead man promising to make a living woman feel alive. But it was also the most honest offer anyone had made me in 5 years. I looked around the study, at the desk where he had died, at the shelves of books he would never read again, at the window that looked out onto a garden he could no longer walk through. And I thought about my own life, about the endless balls and the gilded chairs and the careful avoidance of eyes, about being present but unseen, about the slow death of the spirit that came from having no purpose, no connection, no meaning. Very well, I said. I will help you. I will discover who killed you. The relief that washed over his face was profound. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was something like gratitude there, or perhaps something deeper. Thank you, he said. Eleanor, thank you. It was the second time he had said my name, and it affected me just as powerfully as the first. No one said my name like that anymore, as though it mattered, as though I was a person rather than a problem or an embarrassment or a forgotten obligation. Where do I begin? I asked. What do you know? Who would have wanted you dead? He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Who did not want me dead? I was not well liked, Eleanor. I was ruthless in business. I foreclosed on properties when payments were late. I dismissed servants without reference for the smallest infractions. I refused to support charitable causes or show mercy to debtors. I was, as I said, not a good man. But surely, there must be someone who stands out, I pressed. Someone who had more reason than others. He thought for a moment, his brow furrowing in concentration. My brother, Henry. He inherited everything when I died. The title, the estates, the fortune. He was in the house that night, hosting a dinner party in the ballroom. He could have come to my study, could have added something to the brandy. I nodded, making a mental note. Who else? My business partner, Edward Thornberry. We had a disagreement the week before I died about the direction of our investments. He wanted to expand into more speculative ventures. I refused. We parted on bad terms. He, too, was at the dinner party that evening. Anyone else? He hesitated, then said quietly, There was a woman, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, a widow. We had an arrangement of sorts. Nothing romantic, you understand. Simply an understanding. But I ended it rather abruptly a month before my death. She was angry. She sent me letters, made threats. Empty threats, I thought at the time. But perhaps I was wrong. I absorbed this information, my mind already beginning to work through the possibilities. A brother with much to gain. A business partner with a grievance. A scorned woman with wounded pride. Any of them could have had reason to want the Duke dead. "Is Mrs. Hartwell still in London?" I asked. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have been trapped in this room, in this house. I can sometimes sense what is happening in other parts of the building, can sometimes hear conversations that drift through walls, but I cannot leave to follow anyone or discover where they have gone. Then I will find out," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I will make inquiries, carefully, discreetly. No one will suspect a forgotten wallflower of investigating a 3-year-old death." He looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "You are braver than you know. Or more desperate," I said quietly. "Perhaps it is the same thing." The clock in the hallway began to chime, and I realized with a start that time had slipped away from me. It was already 3:30. My aunt would be looking for me, preparing for our visit to Lady Hartley, wondering where I had disappeared to. "I must go," I said reluctantly. "But I will return. Tomorrow, if I can manage it." "Come in the afternoon," he said, "when the servants are occupied upstairs. Use the side door again. It is rarely locked." I nodded and turned toward the door, but before I could reach it, his voice stopped me. "Eleanor." I looked back. He was standing in the gray light from the window, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, something that made him look less like the feared Duke of Blackthorn and more like a man who had been very, very alone. "Thank you," he said again, "for believing me, for seeing me." "You are welcome," I whispered. Then I slipped out of the study, through the shadowed corridors, and out the side door into the December afternoon. The cold air hit my face like a slap, bringing me back to myself. I had just agreed to investigate a murder. I had just promised to help a ghost find peace. It was madness, complete madness. But as I hurried through the streets back to my aunt's house, my cheeks flushed from the cold and the excitement, I realized that I felt more alive than I had in years. I had a purpose. I had a secret. I had someone waiting for me, even if that someone was dead. My aunt was in the entrance hall when I arrived, already wearing her coat and gloves, her face tight with disapproval. "Where have you been? We are going to be late." "I'm sorry, Aunt Margaret," I said, stripping off my own coat and gloves with practiced efficiency. I lost track of time. She studied me with narrowed eyes, and I wondered what she saw. Did she notice the flush in my cheeks, the brightness in my eyes? Could she sense that something had changed, that the resigned, quiet girl she had grown accustomed to had discovered something worth caring about? "Well, hurry and change," she said at last, "and for heaven's sake, try to make a good impression on Lady Hartley's nephew. This may be your last chance at a respectable match." "Yes, Aunt Margaret," I said, for what felt like the 100th time that day. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I was not thinking about Lady Hartley's nephew or respectable matches or any of the things my aunt wanted me to think about. I was thinking about a ghost in a darkened study, about a bitter taste and a crushing pain and the mystery of a death that had never been solved. I was thinking about tomorrow, about returning to Blackthorn House, about beginning an investigation that no one knew I was conducting. I was thinking about the Duke's eyes when he said my name. And I was thinking that, perhaps, just perhaps, being forgotten by society had given me the one thing I needed most, the freedom to pursue the truth without anyone noticing or caring what I was doing. For the first time in 5 years, I had found something worth living for, even if it meant consorting with the dead to do it. The visit to Lady Hartley was exactly as tedious as I had anticipated. Her nephew, Mr. Gerald Pembroke, was a pleasant enough gentleman with thinning hair and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. He spoke at length about his time in India, about tea plantations and monsoons, and the difficulties of managing native workers. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over the names the Duke had given me. Henry Blackthorn, Edward Thornberry, Catherine Hartwell, Mr. Pembroke seemed to find me acceptably quiet, which I supposed was a point in my favor. My aunt watched our interaction with barely concealed hope. When we finally departed, she squeezed my hand in the carriage. "He seemed quite taken with you, Eleanor. This could be your opportunity." "Yes, Aunt Margaret," I said. But I felt nothing. No excitement, no anticipation, not even the mild interest I might once have felt. My thoughts were already racing ahead to tomorrow, to the study, to the investigation I had promised to undertake. Compared to uncovering a murder, the prospect of marriage to Mr. Pembroke seemed impossibly dull. That evening, I excused myself early and retreated to my room. I lit the lamp on my writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. I needed to organize my thoughts, to approach this logically. I wrote the 3 names in a careful hand, then beneath each one, what I knew. Henry Blackthorne, the Duke's younger brother. Inherited title, estates, fortune. Present at dinner party the night of the death. Opportunity and motive, both strong. Edward Thornberry, business partner. Disagreement about investments, also present at the dinner party. Financial motive, wounded pride. Catherine Hartwell, widow. Arrangement ended abruptly. Sent angry letters, made threats. Whereabouts unknown. I stared at the names until they began to blur. How did one investigate a murder that had occurred 3 years ago? How did one ask questions without arousing suspicion? I was not a detective. I was barely part of society. I had no connections, no influence, no reason to be asking about any of these people, except that I did have one advantage. No one noticed me. No one paid attention to what I did or where I went or what I might overhear. I was invisible, and invisibility, I was beginning to realize, could be a kind of power. The next afternoon, I told my aunt I was visiting the lending library. She barely looked up from her correspondence, already resigned to my solitary habits. I wrapped myself in my warmest cloak and set out once more for Blackthorne House. The side door was unlocked, as he had promised. I slipped inside, my heart pounding, and made my way through the servants' corridors to the study. This time I knew the route, and I moved with more confidence, though I still held my breath each time I passed a doorway. He was waiting for me when I entered, standing by the window again, as though that was his natural place, the spot where he felt most himself. He turned when he heard the door open, and something in his expression lightened. "You came again." "I said I would," I replied, removing my gloves. "I have been thinking about your suspects. I need to learn more about each of them, about their movements that night, their relationships with you, their circumstances now." He nodded slowly. "Henry hosts a dinner here every month. Tomorrow evening, in fact. The same circle of people, more or less, who were here the night I died. You could attend. I cannot simply invite myself to a dinner party," I said. "No," he agreed. "But your aunt knows Lady Blackthorne, does she not? Henry's wife. Perhaps she could arrange an invitation." The thought of asking my aunt for such a favor made me uneasy. She would want to know why, would see it as evidence that I was finally trying to re-enter society properly. But he was right. It was the most direct way to observe the suspects together. "I will try," I said. He moved closer, and I noticed that each time I saw him, he seemed slightly more solid, more present, or perhaps I was simply growing accustomed to seeing him. "What will you tell your aunt?" "That I wish to make amends with society, that I am ready to try again. She will be so pleased she will not ask many questions." "You are a good liar," he observed. "I have had 5 years of practice at pretending," I said quietly. Something flickered across his face, understanding perhaps, or regret. He gestured to the chair by the desk. "Sit. Tell me what else you need to know." I sat, arranging my skirts, feeling strange to be seated while he stood. But then, normal rules of propriety hardly applied when one was conversing with a ghost. I pulled out the paper on which I had written the names. "Catherine Hartwell," I said. "Where might I find her? Is she still in London?" He was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I do not know. After I ended our arrangement, she left for Bath. Her sister lives there. But whether she returned to London, I cannot say. I have heard no mention of her in 3 years." "What was the nature of your arrangement?" I asked, then felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Forgive me. That is impertinent." "No," he said. "You have a right to know if you are to investigate. It was a business arrangement as much as anything else. She was a widow of reduced circumstances. I provided her with a house, an income, certain social protections. In return, she provided companionship, discretion, nothing scandalous by the standards of our world, but not something that could be spoken of openly either. And you ended it abruptly, I said. Why? He turned away, looking out the window at the garden. Because I realized I felt nothing for her. No affection, no desire, no warmth. She was beautiful and accomplished, and everything a man in my position should have wanted. But when I looked at her, I felt only emptiness, and I could not bear the pretense any longer. Did she love you? I asked softly. He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. I do not think Catherine Hartwell was capable of love. She was capable of anger, yes, and wounded pride when her comfortable life was threatened. But love? No, I do not think so. Then perhaps her motive is not as strong as the others, I mused. If it was merely a business arrangement to her as well. Perhaps, he agreed. Or perhaps that is why she would have killed me. Not for love, but for security. For the house and income I took away. I made a note on my paper. I would need to discover whether Mrs. Hartwell had returned to London, and if so, where she might be found. It would be delicate work, the sort of inquiry that would require careful listening at tea parties and drawing rooms. What about Edward Thornbury? I asked. Is he still your brother's business partner? Yes, the Duke said. Henry kept the partnership after my death. Thornbury handles the investments, while Henry manages the properties. They meet regularly at the club, or here at the house. He will likely be at tomorrow's dinner. Good, I said. Then I can observe him. What should I look for? He considered this. Thornbury was always ambitious, always looking for the next opportunity, the next scheme that would make his fortune. I held him back, insisted on conservative investments, on building wealth slowly and carefully. He resented that. He thought I was a coward. Were you? I asked. He met my eyes. Yes, in business and in everything else. I was afraid of risk, afraid of loss, afraid of anything that might threaten the perfect control I had built around my life, and my fear made me cruel to those who wanted more. There was such honesty in his words, such raw self-awareness, that I found myself unable to look away. In death, he had lost the armor he had worn in life. He was vulnerable now in a way he had never allowed himself to be when his heart still beat. And your brother? I asked, more gently now. What was your relationship with him? He sighed. Henry always lived in my shadow. I was the heir, the Duke, the one with all the power and responsibility. He was simply the spare, the younger brother whose only purpose was to exist in case something happened to me. I never treated him with much consideration. I gave him an allowance, allowed him to live here, but I made it clear that everything was mine, and he was here on sufferance. Did he resent you? The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Yes, I think he did, though he hid it well. Henry has always been good at hiding what he truly feels. Then he had the strongest motive of all, I said. Your death changed everything for him. It did, the Duke agreed. But I cannot believe Henry would murder his own brother. He is weak, Eleanor. Indecisive. He has always preferred to avoid conflict rather than confront it. I cannot imagine him having the courage to kill. People can surprise you, I said, especially when there is much at stake. He looked at me with those dark, intense eyes. You are very wise for someone so young. I am not young anymore, I said. Not really. 5 years of sitting alone ages a person in ways that have nothing to do with time. He moved closer until he was standing just beside the chair where I sat. I could feel the cold that radiated from him, but it no longer frightened me. It was simply part of what he was now. What happened to you, Eleanor? He asked quietly. What scandal ruined you? I looked down at my hands, at the paper with its careful list of names and motives. I had not spoken of it in 5 years. Not even my aunt had asked, had simply accepted that it was real and that I must bear the consequences. But here, in this quiet room with a ghost who had confessed his own failures, I found that I wanted to speak. There was a young man, I said, the son of an earl. We met at a ball during my first season. He danced with me twice. He told me I was beautiful. Afterward, he wrote me a letter asking permission to call on me. I was so happy, so hopeful. I paused, remembering that feeling. The dizzy excitement of being noticed, of being chosen. of imagining a future that included love and children and a place in the world. But the letter never reached me properly, I continued. It was delivered to the wrong address by mistake, to a house 2 doors down from my aunt's. The lady who lived there opened it, read it, and for reasons I will never understand, she told everyone that the letter contained improper suggestions, that the Earl's son had propositioned me, that I had encouraged him with my forward behavior at the ball. And people believed her? He asked, anger creeping into his voice. They wanted to believe her, I said. She was well connected. I was nobody, a country girl with no fortune and no protector but an elderly aunt. The Earl's son denied everything, of course. Said he had never written any letter, and I had no proof, no evidence, just my word against hers. What became of him? He married someone else 3 months later, a duke's daughter. I heard they are very happy. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. I had thought I had made peace with it, had accepted that life was unfair and there was nothing to be done. But speaking it aloud, I realized the wound was still fresh. That is monstrous, the Duke said quietly. You were destroyed for nothing, for a lie. Yes, I said, but that is how the world works, is it not? For women, anyway. Reputation is everything, and once lost, it can never be regained, no matter the truth. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, I am sorry for what happened to you. You deserved better. The words, simple as they were, touched something deep inside me. No one had ever apologized for what had been done to me. No one had ever acknowledged that I had been wronged. Thank you, I whispered. We sat in silence for a while, the Duke standing beside my chair, the afternoon light fading in the window behind him. It was a strange intimacy, this sharing of wounds and failures. We were both ghosts in our own way, both haunted by the lives we had not been allowed to live. I should go soon, I said at last, but I will speak to my aunt about the dinner tomorrow, and I will observe your suspects as closely as I can. Be careful, he said. If one of them is a murderer, they may be dangerous still. I will be careful, I promised, but I think my invisibility will protect me. Murderers rarely notice wallflowers. He smiled then, the first real smile I had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger and more vulnerable. You are not a wallflower, Eleanor. You are a rose growing in the shadow, waiting for sunlight. The words caught me off guard. I felt heat rise to my cheeks and looked away, flustered in a way I had not been since I was 18 and still believed in compliments. That is very poetic, I managed. I was not known for poetry in life, he said. Perhaps death has made me sentimental. Or perhaps, I said, daring to meet his eyes again, you are simply learning to say what you feel instead of hiding behind walls. He held my gaze, and something passed between us. An understanding. A recognition. We were both learning, I realized. Learning to be honest, to be vulnerable, to let down the defenses we had built to survive. I will see you tomorrow, I said, rising from the chair. After the dinner. I will come and tell you what I have discovered. I will be waiting, he said. I am always waiting now. It is all I can do. There was such loneliness in those words that I almost reached out to touch him, to offer comfort the way one would to any person in pain. But I stopped myself. He was not solid. He was cold and strange and other. Touching him would only remind us both of what he had lost. Instead, I gathered my cloak and gloves and slipped out of the study, back through the corridors, out into the December afternoon. The fog had returned, thick and gray, muffling the sounds of the city. I walked through it feeling like a ghost myself, caught between worlds, belonging nowhere and everywhere at once. That evening, I approached my aunt in the drawing room. She was working on her embroidery, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking tired and older than her years. Aunt Margaret, I said, might I ask a favor? She looked up, surprise evident on her face. I so rarely asked for anything. What is it, dear? I have been thinking, I said carefully, about what you said, about trying harder, about making a good impression, and I wondered if perhaps you might speak to Lady Blackthorne about including me at their next dinner party. My aunt's face lit up with such hope that I felt a stab of guilt for deceiving her. Oh, Eleanor, do you really mean it? You want to attend? I do, I said. "I think it is time I stopped hiding. Time I faced society again." She set down her embroidery and came to embrace me, something she had not done in years. I stiffened in surprise, then awkwardly patted her back. "I am so glad," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I will call on Lady Blackthorn first thing tomorrow. I am sure she will be delighted to include you." "Thank you, Aunt Margaret," I said. That night, I lay in bed thinking about what I had set in motion. Tomorrow I would dine with potential murderers. I would smile and make polite conversation and watch for signs of guilt or fear or hidden knowledge. And then I would return to the study and tell a ghost what I had learned. It was mad. All of it was mad. But it was also the most alive I had felt in 5 years. I closed my eyes and saw his face, the way he had looked at me when I told him about my scandal, the anger on my behalf, the apology, the smile that had transformed his features. "You are a rose growing in shadow, waiting for sunlight." Perhaps, I thought as sleep finally claimed me. Perhaps we both were. The dinner party at Blackthorn House was more elaborate than I had anticipated. My aunt had been thrilled when Lady Blackthorn sent a gracious acceptance of my attendance, and she had insisted on having my best gown pressed and my hair dressed properly. As our carriage pulled up to the entrance, I felt my stomach tighten with nerves. Not the social anxiety I usually felt, but something sharper. I was walking into a room with a murderer, and I had to pretend I knew nothing. Lady Blackthorn greeted us in the entrance hall with genuine warmth. She was a plump, cheerful woman who seemed entirely unsuited to the dark grandeur of Blackthorn House. She took my hands in hers and smiled. "Miss Ashford, how lovely to finally have you join us. Henry has spoken of your aunt so fondly, and I have been meaning to extend an invitation for some time. You are very kind, Lady Blackthorn," I said. As we moved through the entrance hall, I glanced at the portrait of the Duke that hung on the wall. In the painting, he looked severe and unapproachable, his dark eyes staring out with an expression of barely concealed disdain. The artist had captured something of his coldness, but none of the vulnerability I had come to know. I wondered if he could see me now, if he was watching from somewhere in the house. The drawing room was already filled with guests. I recognized several faces from other social gatherings, people who had spent years perfecting the art of looking through me. Tonight, however, my presence seemed to create a small stir. Perhaps it was simply the novelty of seeing me somewhere other than sitting alone at a ball. Lord Henry Blackthorn approached us with a slightly nervous smile. He was shorter than his brother had been, softer around the middle, with thinning hair and kind but weak eyes. He bowed to my aunt and then to me. "Miss Ashford, what a pleasure to have you here. I hope you will enjoy the evening." "I am certain I shall," I said, studying him carefully. This was a man who might have killed his own brother. Yet looking at him now, in his ill-fitting dinner jacket with his anxious smile, I found it difficult to imagine him capable of murder. But then, the Duke had said Henry was good at hiding his true feelings. A tall man with iron-gray hair and sharp features joined our group. Lord Blackthorn made the introductions. "May I present Mr. Edward Thornbury? Edward, this is Miss Eleanor Ashford and her aunt, the Countess of Ashford." Thornbury's eyes passed over me with brief interest before dismissing me as unimportant. "Charmed," he said in a tone that suggested he was anything but. He turned immediately to my aunt. "I understand you maintain properties in Dorset, my lady. Excellent hunting country, I believe." As my aunt engaged with him on the subject of country estates, I observed Thornbury closely. Unlike Lord Blackthorn, there was nothing soft about this man. His eyes were calculating, his posture aggressive. He had the look of someone perpetually assessing value, measuring worth, seeking advantage. If he had disagreed with the Duke over business matters, I could easily imagine that disagreement turning bitter. Dinner was announced, and we processed to the dining room. I found myself seated between a retired colonel, who was hard of hearing, and a young gentleman recently down from Oxford who was more interested in his wine than conversation. This suited me perfectly. It allowed me to observe without being observed, to listen without participating. The dinner table glittered with silver and crystal. Course after course appeared, each more elaborate than the last. The conversation flowed around topics of politics and scandal and the upcoming season. I ate mechanically, my attention focused on the 3 people I was truly here to watch. Lord Blackthorn presided at the head of the table with his anxious smile, laughing too loudly at jokes and trying too hard to be an attentive host. Several times I caught him watching the door to the servants' corridor with an odd expression, almost fearful. Did he see ghosts there? Did he know his brother still lingered in this house? Thornbury, seated near the center of the table, dominated much of the conversation. He spoke of investments in railway schemes, of opportunities in the Americas, of the changing nature of commerce. Lord Blackthorn nodded along but contributed little. Their dynamic was clear. Thornbury was the force, and Lord Blackthorn merely followed. At one point, Thornbury raised his glass and said with what seemed like forced joviality, "To the late Duke. May he rest in peace, though God knows he never allowed any of us much peace while he lived." There was uncomfortable laughter around the table. Lord Blackthorn's face went pale, and he fumbled with his napkin. "I do not think we should speak of my brother in such terms, Edward." Thornbury shrugged. "I only speak the truth. He was a difficult man, Henry. We all know it. But his passing allowed you to flourish, did it not? To make your own decisions, to live your own life." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Was it a taunt? An accusation? Or simply the tactless observation of a man who had never learned subtlety? I could not tell, but I noted the way Lord Blackthorn's hands trembled as he reached for his wine. The ladies withdrew after dinner, leaving the gentlemen to their port and cigars. In the drawing-room, I positioned myself near a group that included Lady Blackthorn and several other matrons. They spoke of servants and children and the difficulty of maintaining standards in modern times. I listened with half an ear, my mind turning over what I had observed. Then I heard a name that made me focus sharply. "I saw Catherine Hartwell last week," one of the ladies was saying, "at the modistes. She has returned to London, it seems." My pulse quickened. Mrs. Hartwell was in London. "That complicated matters considerably." "Has she indeed?" another lady replied. "I thought she had settled permanently in Bath after that unfortunate business with the Duke." Lady Blackthorn's face tightened. "We do not speak of that, Mrs. Daventry. I know, my dear, but one cannot help but remember. Such a scandal. And then his sudden death so soon after he ended their arrangement. Some people thought it suspicious." "It was his heart," Lady Blackthorn said firmly. "The doctors were quite clear." "Were they?" Mrs. Daventry said archly. "I heard there were questions, whispers." "That is quite enough," Lady Blackthorn said, her voice sharp. "My brother-in-law died of natural causes. The authorities investigated and found nothing amiss. I will not have gossip in my home." The conversation shifted quickly to safer topics, but I had learned what I needed. Mrs. Hartwell was in London. There had been whispers about the Duke's death, and Lady Blackthorn was defensive about it, perhaps more than the situation warranted. When the gentlemen rejoined us, I watched for any interaction between Lord Blackthorn and Thornbury, any sign of tension or alliance. But they remained cordial, if distant. Thornbury spent most of his time speaking with a group of younger men about investment opportunities, while Lord Blackthorn hovered nervously near his wife. The evening wore on with interminable slowness. I played my part as the quiet, unremarkable guest, speaking when spoken to and otherwise fading into the background. It was a role I had perfected over 5 years, and it served me well now. No one paid me any particular attention. No one wondered why I was really there. Finally, the evening drew to a close. Carriages were called. Guests began to depart. My aunt was in high spirits, pleased that I had attended and behaved appropriately. She chattered about Lady Blackthorn's graciousness and the quality of the dinner as our carriage carried us home through the foggy streets. I made appropriate responses, but my mind was already racing ahead. I needed to return to the study. I needed to tell him what I had learned. But it was past midnight, and the house would be locked, the servants retired. I would have to wait until tomorrow. That night, I lay awake in the darkness, replaying every moment of the dinner in my mind. Lord Blackthorn's nervous behavior, Thornbury's calculated comments, the revelation that Mrs. Hartwell had returned to London, the whispers about suspicious circumstances surrounding the Duke's death. 3 years was a long time to keep a secret, a long time to live with guilt, if one was guilty. But it was also a long time for details to be forgotten, for evidence to disappear, for truth to become impossible to prove. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I would tell him everything, and together We would determine our next steps. I must have dozed eventually, because I woke to gray morning light and the sound of rain against my window. My aunt had morning calls planned, and I was expected to accompany her. I endured several hours of sitting in overheated drawing rooms, drinking tea, and listening to conversations that held no interest for me. All I could think about was getting back to Blackthorn House. Finally, in the late afternoon, I pleaded a headache and begged to be excused from the remaining calls. My aunt, still buoyed by my supposed social rehabilitation, agreed readily and sent me home in the carriage. I did not go home. I had the driver let me out several streets away and walk through the rain to Blackthorn House. The side door was unlocked as always. I slipped inside, water dripping from my cloak, and made my way to the study. He was there, standing at the window as though he had not moved since I left him yesterday. But when I entered, he turned quickly, and the relief on his face was profound. "Eleanor," he said, and there was such warmth in his voice that it made my chest tighten. "I have been waiting. Tell me everything." I removed my wet cloak and moved to the chair by the desk. I told him about the dinner, about Lord Blackthorn's nervousness, and Thornberry's calculated words. I told him about the conversation I had overheard regarding Mrs. Hartwell's return to London and the whispers about his death. He listened intently, his expression growing darker as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Thornberry was always bold," he said finally. "But to speak so openly about benefiting from my death, that takes a particular kind of arrogance. Either he is innocent and simply tactless, or he is guilty and believes himself untouchable." "And your brother?" I asked. His behavior seemed strange, fearful almost. "Henry has always been fearful," the Duke said. "Of me, of responsibility, of his own shadow. But you are right that his reaction was extreme. Perhaps guilt weighs on him. Or perhaps he simply knows something he has not spoken of." "What about Mrs. Hartwell?" I pressed. "If she has returned to London, we need to find her, to speak with her." "How?" he asked. "You cannot simply call on a woman of her reputation. It would be scandalous." "I am already scandalized," I pointed out. "What more can they say about me? And besides, I will think of something. A pretext." "You are determined," he said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. "I gave my word," I said simply. "I will find who killed you." He moved closer, and I realized he was standing directly beside my chair now, near enough that if he were alive, I could have reached out and touched him. The cold emanating from him had become familiar, almost comforting. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why do you care so much? You did not know me in life. You owe me nothing." I looked up at him, at the face I had come to know so well over these past few days, the hard lines that had begun to soften, the eyes that saw me in a way no one else did. "Because," I said, "you were murdered. Because someone took your life and faced no consequences. Because justice matters, even for men who were not always good. And because you asked me to help you, and no one has asked me for anything in 5 years except to be quieter and more invisible than I already was." He knelt beside my chair, a movement so sudden and graceful that it startled me. In this position, his eyes were level with mine, and the intensity in them took my breath away. "You are extraordinary," he said. "Do you know that? You sit in ballrooms and let them ignore you, and all the while you are 10 times braver and more honorable than any of them." "I am not brave," I whispered. "I am only doing what needs to be done." "That is the definition of bravery," he said. "Doing what must be done despite fear." We were so close now. Close enough that I could see the way he was watching my mouth. Close enough that if he could breathe, I would have felt his breath on my face. The air between us seemed to thicken with something I did not dare name. "I should go," I said, though I made no move to rise. "My aunt will wonder where I am." "Stay," he said. "Just a little longer, please." There was such longing in his voice that I found I could not refuse. "What would you have me do?" "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me about yourself. Your real self, not the quiet wallflower everyone sees. Tell me what you dream of, what you wanted before the scandal took it all away." No one had asked me that in so long. I hardly remembered how to answer. But sitting there in the study with the rain falling outside and a ghost kneeling beside my chair, I found the words. "I wanted to matter," I said slowly. I wanted to be seen and known and valued for who I truly was, not just for my marriageability or my connections or my ability to be appropriately quiet. I wanted someone to look at me and see Eleanor, not just a young woman of suitable birth who might make an acceptable wife. And now, he asked, what do you want now? I met his eyes. The same thing. I have not stopped wanting it. I have only stopped believing it was possible. It is possible, he said fiercely. Eleanor, you matter. You are seen. I see you. You are dead, I said. But there was no cruelty in my words, only sadness. Does that make it less real? He asked. Does it mean what I see is less true? I did not have an answer to that. Instead, I asked him the same question. What did you want? Before you died? He was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to feel something, he said at last. Anything. I had built such perfect walls around myself, such careful defenses, that I had forgotten how to feel. Everything was obligation and duty and the proper maintenance of appearances. I looked at beautiful things and felt nothing. I stood in rooms full of people and felt utterly alone. I think, in the end, I had forgotten how to be human. And now? I echoed his own question back to him. Now, he said, I feel everything. The agony of being trapped, the frustration of being unable to act, the loneliness of 3 years with no one to speak to, and lately something else, something I did not expect. What? I whispered. Hope, he said. Because of you. Because for the first time since I died, I believe that perhaps there is a purpose to this half-existence, that perhaps I am here because there is something unfinished, something that needs to be made right, and you are helping me do that. The rain drummed against the windows. The study was growing dark as evening approached, and I knew I truly needed to leave soon or risk being discovered. But I could not seem to make myself rise from the chair, could not seem to break the connection between us. What will happen? I asked. If we discover who killed you? If we find proof and bring them to justice? What will happen to you? I do not know, he admitted. Perhaps I will be free to move on, to whatever comes next. Or perhaps I will simply cease to exist, my purpose fulfilled. I cannot say. The thought of him disappearing, of these conversations ending, of never seeing him again, sent a sharp pain through my chest. I did not want to examine what that meant. Then we must work quickly, I said, forcing myself to stand. I will find Mrs. Hartwell. I will discover what she knows. Be careful, he said, rising as well. If she is involved, she may be dangerous. I will be careful, I promised. I gathered my cloak, still damp from the rain. When I reached the door, I looked back. He was standing in the center of the room, watching me with those dark, intense eyes. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, I confirmed. As I slipped through the corridors and out into the rainy afternoon, I felt the weight of what was happening between us. We were growing closer. Intimacy was building with every conversation, every shared confidence. And it was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. He was dead. I was alive. There could be no future for us, no matter what I felt or what he felt. And yet, I could not stop myself from returning, could not stop myself from caring. Perhaps, I thought, as I hurried through the rain-slicked streets, that was the cruelest part of all. Not that society had rejected me, but that the only person who truly saw me was someone I could never truly have. Finding Catherine Hartwell proved easier than I had anticipated. A discreet inquiry at the modistas, where she had been spotted, yielded an address in a modest but respectable part of town. She had taken lodgings there under her own name, which suggested either innocence or remarkable boldness. I arrived on her doorstep the following afternoon, my heart hammering beneath my sensible gray dress. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would present myself, but standing before her door, all my careful plans seemed fragile and inadequate. The woman who answered my knock was striking rather than beautiful. She had dark hair streaked with silver, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that assessed me with immediate suspicion. Mrs. Hartwell, I said, my name is Eleanor Ashford. I wonder if I might speak with you about the late Duke of Blackthorn. Her expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Why? I am investigating the circumstances of his death, I said. I believe there are questions that were never properly answered. She studied me for a long moment, then stepped aside. You had better come in. Her rooms were small, but elegantly furnished, filled with the remnants of a more prosperous life. Fine china displayed on modest shelves, a beautiful writing desk that looked too grand for the space. She gestured to a chair and sat opposite me, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. The Duke died 3 years ago, she said. Why are you asking questions now? Because I believe he was murdered, I said bluntly, and I believe you might know something about it. To my surprise, she laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You are not the first person to suggest such a thing. There were whispers, of course, after his death, especially given that he ended our arrangement so shortly before. Some people thought I had poisoned him out of spite. Did you? I asked. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something like respect there. No, Miss Ashford. I did not. I was angry with him, yes, furious even. He cast me aside with no warning, no explanation, after 3 years of what I believed to be a mutually beneficial arrangement. But I did not kill him. There was truth in her voice, in the weary resignation of her tone. I believed her, though I could not have said why. Then who did? I asked. She rose and moved to the window, looking out at the gray street below. I have thought about that question for 3 years. I have turned it over in my mind countless times, trying to make sense of what happened. And I believe I know, though I have no proof. Tell me, I said. She turned back to face me. The night the Duke died, there was a dinner party at Blackthorn House. I was not invited, of course. I was no longer welcome. But I was angry, and I wanted answers. So I went there anyway. I slipped in through the servants' entrance, thinking I might confront him, demand an explanation for his cruelty. What did you see? I saw his brother Henry leaving the Duke's study. It was late after the guests had gone to the dining room. Henry was carrying something wrapped in a handkerchief, and he looked terrified. He did not see me in the shadows, but I saw him clearly, and I wondered then what he had been doing in that study. My pulse quickened. Did you tell anyone? Who would I tell? She asked. I was a scorned mistress, a woman of questionable reputation. My word meant nothing, and I had no proof, only suspicion, so I said nothing. I returned to Bath and tried to forget. But you came back to London, I said. She nodded. Because 3 years is long enough to live with silence, because I have heard that Henry Blackthorn is now courting a young woman, a girl barely out of the schoolroom, and I cannot bear the thought of him living happily while his brother lies in the ground unavenged. Do you think Henry killed him for the inheritance? I think Henry killed him because he was tired of living in his shadow, she said, because he wanted to be his own man, and because the Duke, for all his cold brilliance, never saw his brother as a threat. That was his fatal mistake. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Henry. It had been Henry all along, the nervous, weak man who hid his true nature behind smiles and anxiety. The brother who had finally taken what he believed should have been his. I need proof, I said, something that will stand up to scrutiny. Your testimony alone will not be enough. Mrs. Hartwell moved to her writing desk and opened a drawer. She withdrew a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. After I saw Henry that night, I did some investigating of my own, quietly, carefully. I learned that in the weeks before the Duke's death, Henry had been consulting with an apothecary in Whitechapel, a man known for selling substances that proper doctors would not provide. This is his name and address. I took the paper with trembling hands. Why are you giving this to me? Because you are the first person to ask the right questions, she said, and because I think you genuinely care about finding the truth. Use it wisely, Miss Ashford, and be careful. If Henry killed once, he may kill again to protect his secret. I left Mrs. Hartwell's lodgings with the paper clutched in my hand and my thoughts in turmoil. I needed to go to this apothecary, needed to confirm what Henry had purchased. But more than that, I needed to tell him, the Duke. I needed to tell him what I had discovered. The afternoon was fading as I made my way once more to Blackthorn House. The side door opened as always, and I moved through the familiar corridors to the study. He was there, pacing near the window with an agitation I had not seen before. Eleanor, he said when I entered. Thank God. I have been watching the house, and I saw Henry go into the library. He was carrying a bottle of brandy, the same brand I used to drink. And I remembered something, a memory that had been buried until now. "What?" I asked, moving quickly to him. "The night I died, Henry came to my study. He said he wanted to discuss the estate accounts. I was annoyed at the interruption, but I let him in. He poured us both brandy from the decanter on my desk. We talked for perhaps 10 minutes, nothing of consequence. And then he left. I drank the brandy he had poured, and within the hour, I was dying. His face was anguished with the memory. It was him. It was Henry all along, and I never suspected. My own brother." "I know," I said gently. "Mrs. Hartwell saw him leaving your study that night, and she discovered that he had been visiting an apothecary in Whitechapel, purchasing substances that could kill without leaving obvious traces. I showed him the paper with the apothecary's name and address. We have enough now to bring this to the authorities, to demand a proper investigation." But he was shaking his head. "It has been 3 years, Eleanor. They will say the evidence is too old, too circumstantial. Henry will deny everything, and without proof that he actually purchased poison, without witnesses who can place him in my study at the exact moment, they will dismiss it." "Then what do we do?" I asked, frustration rising in my voice. He looked at me with those dark, intense eyes. "We make him confess. Tonight. The family solicitor is dining here this evening. If we can get Henry to admit what he did in front of a witness, his own words will condemn him. How do we make him confess?" He smiled, and it was a terrible smile. "We use the one thing he fears most. We make him believe that I have returned to haunt him." The plan was simple but dangerous. I would attend the dinner, using some pretext to gain entry. During the meal, I would find a way to separate Henry from the other guests, to lead him to the study where his brother had died. And there, the Duke would reveal himself. Not to me, as he had before, but to Henry. He would make his brother see him, hear him, face the ghost of the man he had murdered. "I am not certain I can do it," the Duke said as we made our preparations. "I have tried before to make myself seen by others, and I have failed. But if there is any chance, it will be now, in this room, with my murderer before me." "You will do it," I said with more confidence than I felt. "You have to." The dinner began at 8. I had sent a note to Lady Blackthorne, claiming I had left my gloves at the previous dinner and asking permission to retrieve them. She had responded with surprised graciousness, inviting me to join them for the meal since I would be there anyway. My aunt thought I had gone mad, but she was too pleased by my sudden social activity to question it too closely. The dinner was a smaller affair than before. Lord and Lady Blackthorne, the family solicitor, Mr. Graves, Thornberry, and 2 other couples I did not know. I played my usual role, quiet and unremarkable, watching for my opportunity. It came during the dessert course. Lord Blackthorne excused himself briefly, and I rose as well, claiming I needed to retrieve my gloves before I forgot again. I followed him into the corridor, my heart pounding. "Lord Blackthorne," I said softly, "might I speak with you privately for a moment?" He turned, surprised. "Miss Ashford, is something wrong?" "I need to discuss something of a delicate nature," I said. "Something regarding your brother." His face went pale. "What about my brother?" "Please," I said. "In his study, where we will not be overheard." I saw the fear flash in his eyes, but he was too well-bred to refuse. He led the way to the study, his steps growing slower as we approached. When he opened the door, I saw him hesitate on the threshold, as though something warned him not to enter. But he did enter, and I followed, closing the door behind us. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice strained. I turned up the gas lamp, filling the room with light. "I know what you did," I said quietly. "I know you murdered your brother." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "That is absurd. My brother died of heart failure. Everyone knows that. Everyone believes that," I corrected. "But it is not true. You poisoned him, Henry. You put something in his brandy that night, something you purchased from an apothecary in Whitechapel. And you have been living with that secret for 3 years. His face was white now, his hands trembling. "You cannot prove any of this. You are making wild accusations based on nothing but fantasy." "I am not alone in my accusations," I said. And then, as though summoned by my words, the Duke appeared. He materialized near the window, more solid than I had ever seen him, his form nearly as substantial as a living man. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost forming on the windows. "Henry," the Duke said, and his voice filled the room like thunder. Lord Blackthorne turned, and the terror that filled his face was absolute. He staggered backward, his mouth open in a silent scream. "You," the Duke said, advancing on his brother. "You killed me. Your own blood. For what? For a title? For money?" "No," Henry gasped. "No, this is not possible. You are dead. You are dead." "I am dead because of you," the Duke said. "Because you were too weak to live in my shadow and too cowardly to challenge me openly. So you poisoned me like a rat and watched me die." "It was not supposed to happen that way," Henry said. And with those words, the truth came tumbling out. "I only wanted you to be ill, to be weak enough that you would let me have more control. But you drank the entire glass, and it was too much, and you died. I never meant for you to die, but you did nothing to save me," the Duke said. "You let me suffer. You let me die alone in agony. And then you took everything that was mine." Henry was weeping now, great heaving sobs. "I am sorry. God forgive me, I am sorry. I have lived with the guilt every day. Every night I see your face frozen in that terrible expression. I thought if I opened the house again, if I tried to be a good Duke, I could make amends." "There are no amends for murder," the Duke said. I moved to the door and opened it. "Mr. Graves," I called, "please come here, quickly." The solicitor appeared moments later, concern on his face. When he entered the study, he saw Lord Blackthorne on his knees, weeping and muttering confessions. He saw me standing by the door, my expression grave. But he did not see the Duke, who had faded back into invisibility. "Mr. Graves," I said, "Lord Blackthorne has just confessed to murdering his brother. I need you to bear witness." What followed was a blur. Mr. Graves calling for the other guests. Someone sending for the police. Henry being led away, still weeping, his confessions recorded by witnesses who could no longer ignore them. Lady Blackthorne's shocked tears. Thornberry's grim satisfaction at having his suspicions confirmed. Through it all, I stood by the window, waiting. When the house finally fell silent and I was alone in the study once more, he appeared. "It is done," he said softly. "Justice has been served." "Yes," I said. But there was no triumph in my voice, only sorrow. He moved closer. "Eleanor, because of you, I can rest now. Because of you, the truth has been revealed." "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew. "I do not know," he said. "But I feel something, a pulling, as though I am being called somewhere else. I think my time here is ending." Tears stung my eyes. "I do not want you to go." "I know," he said, and his voice was infinitely gentle. "But I must. This was never meant to be forever, Eleanor. We both knew that." "Did we?" I asked. "Or did we allow ourselves to hope for the impossible?" "Perhaps both," he said. He was standing very close now, closer than he had ever been. "If I were alive," he said quietly, "I would have courted you properly. I would have called on you with flowers. I would have danced with you at every ball. I would have made the world see you the way I see you." "And how is that?" I whispered. "As the most extraordinary woman I have ever known," he said. "Brave and honest and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with appearance. You saved me, Eleanor. Not just by finding my killer, but by reminding me what it means to feel, to care, to love." The last word hung in the air between us, precious and painful. "I love you too," I said, and saying it aloud made it both more real and more impossible. "I love you, and you are leaving, and I will never see you again." He raised his hand, and for the first time, I felt him truly touch me. His fingers were cold but solid, cupping my cheek with infinite tenderness. "You will live," he said. "You will go to balls and hold your head high. You will let the world see you. And you will find someone who deserves you, someone who can give you the life I never could." "I do not want anyone else," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You will," he said, "someday, and I will be glad, wherever I am, that you found happiness." The light in the room was changing, growing brighter somehow, though the lamps had not moved. He was fading, becoming translucent, his hand on my cheek growing lighter. "I have to go now," he said. But Eleanor, thank you. For everything. For seeing me. For believing in me. For loving me, even though you knew it was impossible. Wait, I said desperately. What was your name? Your given name? I realized I have never known it. He smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. William, he said. My name was William. And then he was gone. The cold left the room. The light returned to normal. I stood alone in the study where a man named William had died, and where, 3 years later, he had finally found peace. I do not know how long I stood there, weeping for a ghost and a love that could never have been. Eventually, I gathered myself and left the study for the last time. I walked through the quiet house and out into the December night. The scandal of Henry Blackthorne's arrest consumed London society for weeks. My role in uncovering the truth became known, and suddenly I was no longer invisible. People wanted to hear my story, wanted to know how I had discovered the truth. My aunt was simultaneously appalled and proud, but something unexpected happened. The same society that had shunned me for 5 years began to see me differently. I was no longer the girl with the ruined reputation. I was the woman who had solved a murder, who had brought a killer to justice. Invitations began to arrive, gentlemen began to call, and I, who had wanted nothing more than to be seen, found that I no longer cared quite so much what they thought of me. I attended balls again, but now I held my head high. I spoke when I had something to say. I refused invitations that did not interest me. I discovered that 5 years of invisibility had given me a strength I had not known I possessed. Mr. Pembroke called on me several times, but I gently discouraged his attentions. There were other gentlemen too, some kind, some interesting, but none of them made me feel the way William had made me feel. 6 months after that night in the study, I stood in a ballroom and watched the dancers spin, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I smiled. Not because I was dancing, though several gentlemen had asked. Not because I had been accepted back into society, though I had been. But because I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had learned to see myself, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift William had given me. Not love, though there had been that too, but the understanding that my worth was not determined by who noticed me or who chose me. It was inherent. It was mine. I left the ball early that evening and walked through the London streets alone, something my aunt would have been horrified to know. The fog was thick, as it had been that first night when William had whispered dance with me and changed everything. I stopped outside Blackthorne House, now shuttered and empty. The property would be sold, the furnishings auctioned. The study where William had died, and where we had uncovered the truth, would belong to strangers. Thank you, I whispered into the fog, for seeing me. For loving me, for teaching me to love myself. I felt no ghostly presence, no cold touch, no whispered reply. He was gone, truly gone, to whatever peace awaited beyond this world. But I carried him with me still, in the strength he had helped me find, in the truth he had taught me, in the love that had been impossible but real. I turned from the house and walked toward home through the December night, no longer a ghost among the living, but a woman fully alive and finally, beautifully free.